Do you remember your childhood? Do you recall your blissful naivete? How your imagination would fill the waking hours with quests for gold and magical spells? Do you recall how often your imagination would turn against you once the sun went down? When you heard the floorboards creak? Or when that silhouette of your favorite toy suddenly took on a menacing character in the suffocating darkness? It was only when a wiser elder taught us to confront these terrors for what they were, not what we imagined them to be, that the darkness lost its otherworldly power over us. We eventually realized that we were projecting our twisted inner horrors onto something that we couldn't immediately define. For a time, we looked up to our parents and caretakers for this wisdom, for courageously dispelling our fears. It's such a shame that as our consciousness grew in scope, that of our elders seemed to decrease. They seemed to forget the wisdom they once taught us. Instead of eradicating their fear through confrontation, they projected their inner demons onto other people. They did not realize how their criticisms of other people's failings might distract themselves from their own, how their methods of self-preservation from the unknown might intensify the evil they sought to eradicate. Suddenly, their reality became a hell that was almost indistinguishable from the one that kept them awake at night for their entire lives. It seems that they forgot that humans can be just like the monsters we once feared slept beneath our beds. The contents of our personal hells all have the possibility of coming to life if we refuse to confront them honestly. Depending on the person, that inner hell can be of sufficient intensity that outer reality not only matches our inner hell, but can take on a supernatural quality. Instead of ideologically possessed zealots burning down our cities, some may perceive lakes of fire, hanging bodies, and deadly ghosts. Such is the case for the protagonist of Hellblade, Senua's Sacrifice. The titular protagonist suffers from psychosis, a form of mental illness which causes one to question whether the contents of reality are, in fact, real. By living vicariously through Senua's eyes, we see her project the contents of her psychosis-ridden brain into reality. The only way she figures she can go on living is by, as we said, finding some way to confront the contents of her psychosis and eradicate it. This is the basic plot of Hellblade. Senua's psychosis, or darkness as the game refers to it, has made her life a living hell, pun intended. In the mind of Senua, her darkness is the source of everything wrong in not just her life, but also in the lives of her father and tribesmen. Her presence in the lives of those not afflicted by the darkness was supposedly a bad omen, seemingly confirmed when Senua's tribe and lover, Dillion, were slaughtered by the Northmen. With her entire world ruined, Senua figured the only way she could survive is if she confronted the source of this darkness, Hela, the goddess of death. By doing so, she hoped to bargain with Hela to bring Dillion back to life and eradicate her darkness forever. Herein lies Hellblade's most genius element. If we cannot trust Senua's perception of reality, then how do we know if the supernatural things she sees are real? Well, here's a better question. What is real? How do you define real? To quote Morpheus from The Matrix, if you're talking about what you can feel, what you can smell, what you can taste, then real is simply electrical signals interpreted by your brain. According to the famous Swiss psychoanalyst Carl Jung, everything thought, felt, or perceived is a psychic image, and the world itself exists only so far as we are able to produce an image of it. For Senua, being alone and without anybody to dismiss her illusions causes her inner world and outer world to bleed together. Though the result is horrifying, it also has its utility. Senua's confrontation of outer horrors is indistinguishable from her confrontation with inner horrors. By confronting the worst excesses of hell, she will succeed in doing what so many spend their entire lives failing at, courageously overcoming one's inner darkness. The hardest battles are fought in the mind, and the victors of such battles are heralded to such an extent they might as well be gods. Now, even though most human beings do not have psychosis, we do something similar to what Senua does. We have other ways of projecting our inner psychic reality. We do so in the form of myth, and have done so for millennia. For example, the gods of Greek antiquity were gods of love, of sleep, of war, all of which are realities we are slavish to. Think about it. All human beings are mercilessly controlled by the need to love, to sleep, and to act violently. So it would make sense for an ancient pre-scientific culture to characterize these mental processes as gods, things that control less powerful beings. This extends just as well to the Norse gods portrayed in Hellblade. They are mythological representations of inner psychic processes. This is why the game's narrator says that evil can come from the hand behind the gods, a familiar hand cold and cruel. What exactly is that hand which the narrator is trying to describe? What is that undefinable dark hand that reaches up from our unconscious mind and possesses us? For the ancient Norse culture, the concept of gods to describe our unconscious workings was what sufficed, and the hand that created those gods was our own. For example, Hela is the goddess of death. Death is an inescapable, archetypal reality, which affects not only our physical state, but our mental state. By personifying death, it would have helped primitives and ancients to understand how we are slaves to this reality of death, and how we must come to terms with it. This goes for the other gods mentioned in the game. Valravn, the god of illusion, represents the human tendency to perceive reality incorrectly, physically or otherwise. It also extends to the locations in the game. The concept of Hell and Helheim are personifications of our inner terror, of the worst possible place we all could find ourselves both physically and mentally. The mythologizing of our unconscious processes, things we don't understand, is universal to all cultures. In regards to gods of death, the Greeks had Thanatos, the Egyptians had Anubis, and Christians have Satan. With these symbols, cultures projected all that is negative about life onto them. They saw them as figures one must fight. The purpose of this, according to Jung, was the consolidation of consciousness. This was the purpose of rite and dogma. They were dams and walls to keep back the dangers of the unconscious, the perils of the soul. By doing this, people didn't have to wrestle with the darkness inside themselves and risk danger to themselves or their community. However, for those that do try to confront their inner darkness and make sense of it, there is the tendency for the darkness to manipulate one's behavior. This is why the Northmen in Hellblade brutally murdered Senua's tribe as well as her lover Dillion, and trying to make sense out of their inner darkness, that darkness took over their behavior. In order to appease this darkness, they sacrificed living beings to it, in the hopes that the hold this darkness had on their souls would loosen its grip. This is why Senua's inner horror takes the form it does. If Senua's entire life was destroyed by the Northmen, it would make sense to have Senua's unconscious processes take their form. However, because Senua never saw the Northmen when they killed Dillion and her tribe, her perception of them becomes twisted and hellish. The unconscious darkness which plagues Senua is the same darkness that plagues all human beings, but their representation differs from person to person. Yet, it is necessary to represent the darkness in some way so that one may confront it.
Hell will not give you the answers you want, but you mustn't look away from the horrors it does offer, because you cannot overcome suffering if you refuse to look at it.
In making Hellblade Senua's Sacrifice, the developers over at Ninja Theory consulted world-leading neuroscientists and non-profit organizations to properly capture the experience of psychosis and its devastating effects on the human mind. In doing this, these mental health experts must have injected psychological theory into the game's narrative development. The most obvious theory reflects Senua's confrontation with the darkness. That is, Carl Jung's conception of the shadow. In every human mind, there is a conscious side and an unconscious side. What is conscious are things that we know about ourselves and the world. What is unconscious are the things that we don't know or understand. Because we don't understand these unconscious contents, we instinctually vilify and repress them. However, in Carl Jung's mind, because the unconscious is a part of us, we must integrate the contents of our unconscious mind into our conscious mind. This integration is called the confrontation with the shadow. This confrontation, much like Senua's journey, is both an internal process and an external process. By wrestling with the shadow, the dark side of ourselves, and the repulsive aspects of life, we can learn to live with them, bring them under control, and maybe eradicate them, if need be. This will allow our conscious egos to merge with our shadow contents in order to become our ideal self. By overcoming the tribulation the shadow causes us, we grow in character and strength. Senua does so by literally confronting the products of her mind. We do so by figuratively projecting our thoughts and emotions onto the world around us. Despite this one important detail which distinguishes us from Senua, we're not that much different from her. Neither are the characters which surround Senua. The game's narrator comments on this very fact.
But what if each one of us is always dreaming, even when awake, and we only see what our inner eye creates for us? Maybe that's why people feared seeing the world through her eyes. Because if you believe that Senua's reality is twisted, you must accept that yours might be too.
Hellblade's developers sought to bring greater awareness to mental illness, and in my mind, they did so in spades. They recognized that the medium of video games offers a special opportunity to undermine the stigma surrounding mental health. The interactivity of games allows us to live vicariously through characters in a way that books and movies do not offer. When we control Senua, we, more or less, can become one of her psychic functions, one of the supposed gods that control her. This is why the narrator speaks to the player directly. We are one of the Furies, guiding Senua's action. By putting us directly inside the brain of somebody with mental illness, controlling them much in the same way that anxiety or depression might, we begin to realize that the people we have stigmatized are very much like anybody we would consider normal. We are both driven by inner processes we don't yet understand, but we are both seeking to bring them into the light. Once we see how much we have in common, maybe we can learn from one another and create a better world for people of all mental dispositions. It certainly seems to me that the developers of Hellblade embraced this ethic. After all, the psychological theories of this game share a striking resemblance with another horror franchise, one that also features physical projections of psychic contents, one that blurs the line between reality and fiction, one whose visuals look hauntingly similar to that of Hellblade.